1998, Arkadiy Shevchenko, First Deputy Secretary-General of the United Nations. 2004, Vasiliy Mitrokhin, KGB archivist. 2010, Serhiy Tretyakov and Yevhen Toropov, both foreign intelligence officers. 2016, Oleksandr Poteev, a foreign intelligence officer. What unites these dates and people? They were all killed by Russian special services, and they all worked, as one of them said, in the United Nations spy nest. Also, all of them defected to the West from the USSR and Russia. Some of them collaborated with the American or British secret services, others were silent to the very end, but all of them knew why the Kremlin leadership wanted them to die. Arkadiy Shevchenko lived peacefully in the United States for almost 10 years, had a business and married a young woman shortly before his death, but then he suddenly died 4 days before the publication of his book. The book, among other things, was about the activities of Soviet and Russian agents operating under the umbrella of the United Nations. Shevchenko revealed the schemes, according to which Soviet diplomats used large amounts of UN money to bribe high-ranking officials in different countries. The most relevant version of the assassinations of Serhiy Tretyakov and Yevhen Toropov was that they exposed the financial and lobbying manipulation of Russian spy diplomats at the UN. Tretyakov and Toropov, it appeared, died at the hands of the work of the special services. The former died at home during dinner, choking on a piece of meat, while the latter took an electric appliance to the bathroom with him. Cases of mysterious deaths of Russian diplomats in the UN continued to this very day. As for the representative of the Russian Federation to the UN Security Council, Chechen, who died allegedly from a heart attack after demonstrating Viktor Yanukovych's alleged appeal to Russian President Vladimir Putin with a request to enter the territory of Ukraine with his troops. There is still no solid evidence that he was eliminated by the Russians themselves. However, if we compare that with 1957, when Lev Rebet was killed with a hydrocyanic acid, there was also an attempt to play that off as a heart attack. The suspiciously weird deaths of high-ranking Russian diplomats began at the end of 2016. It was then that Russian diplomats were arrested in Argentina for smuggling 400 kilos of cocaine. This case became only public in 2018, thanks to the Argentinian press. The first in that suspicious sequence of deaths of diplomats is the department head of the Latin American Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Petro Poroshenko. He was found shot dead in a Moscow apartment on December the 20th, 2016. He was the immediate chief to the Russian ambassador to Argentina, Victor Coronelli, who tipped off local police about the cocaine scheme hatched by Russian diplomats. Just 6 days later, on December the 26th, an employee of the Russian General Consulate, Roman Skrilnikov, died in Kazakhstan from ostensibly a heart attack. 2 more suspicious deaths occurred the following month. On January the 9th, 2017, the Russian consul in Greece, Andrei Malanin, was found dead in his apartment in Athens. On January the 26th, another Russian diplomat, Ambassador Alexander Kadyrov, died in India after a short illness, as it was noted. 2 more ambassadors suddenly died in August and September of 2017. Migar Yashirinsky in Sudan and Alexander Cherevko in the Netherlands. The component of violence in the overwhelming majority of those deaths will remain unproven due to the simulation of natural causes in the deaths of those people. Tracing the involvement of special services in killings is now only possible when the services themselves are interested in leaving a trace at the place of murder. Sometimes it is necessary to intimidate potential victims, as was the case with the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. They killed Litvinenko. Why? Litvinenko's murder was done in a demonstrative way. The message was, do you see what we can do with traitors? Just like now with the Skripal family. I think this is, first and foremost, indicative, because they can and are able to kill silently, just to say afterwards, if we did it, prove it, and there's no need to prove anything here.
А тут доводити не треба.
In 2000, Alexander Litvinenko, after assassination attempts and under the pressure of several fabricated criminal cases against him, escaped from Russia and eventually settled in the United Kingdom. He was fairly successful at hiding from the Russian intelligence services until November 1st, 2006, when he agreed to meet an old friend from the Russian Special Service, Andrei Lugovoy. The latter came with a man who called himself Vladimir. After a brief meeting over a cup of tea in a cafe, Litvinenko returned home, where he fell ill. At the hospital, he found that he was poisoned with radioactive polonium. Alexander Litvinenko died of radiation sickness 3 weeks later.
З огляду на певні політичні і економічні обставини.
Taking into account certain political and economic circumstances, the British government and the British police did not publicize the Litvinenko case widely. The man who co-wrote the book, Blowing Up Russia, Terror from Within, which highlighted the blowing up of residential buildings in a number of Russian cities.
В ряді міст Російської Федерації, житлових будинків.
Until 1998, Litvinenko was a model intelligence officer until, according to him, he received unwritten instructions from the authorities to kill Boris Berezovsky, a Russian oligarch who opposed the Russian government. Refusing to comply with the order, Litvinenko was subjected to harassment from his fellow servicemen. It was then that he started disclosing secret information. Together with American historian Yuri Felshtinsky, Litvinenko wrote a book with the loud title of Blowing Up Russia, Terror from Within. In it, a large number of facts of outright terrorism by the FSB against its own Russian people was proven. It was also mentioned an episode with the explosive hexogen in a basement. In the book, it was called the Razan case. Felshtinsky said he had a complete reconstruction of that horrible event. The bottom line is that one evening, residents of the apartment building in Razan noticed suspicious people hauling stacks of white powder to the basement. Gripped by panic or caught unawares, the strangers fled, and the sacks turned out to contain an explosive called hexogen. Felshtinsky and Litvinenko proved that it was employees of the Russian intelligence agency who planned to blow up that apartment building.
Як пам'ятаємо, між іншим, терористичні акти 1999 рік, підрив житлових будинків.
As we remember the terrorist attacks of 1999, the blowing up of residential buildings in Moscow, that became the great occasion for the Second Chechen War in the Russian Federation. In addition, the people who were unloading hexogen and moving it to the basement had been caught.
В підвал житлового будинку люди.
And what was the official statement issued by the FSB? It was that they were training residents and watching how they'd react. Naturally, they had to do that with real hexogen. The murder of Alexander Litvinenko in London remains lone proof of the terrorist activity of Russian intelligence services in the foggy Albion, until Serhiy and Yulia Skripal were poisoned in the city of Salisbury on March 5th, 2018. This demonstrative assassination attempt with the use of chemical weapons made British law enforcement officers review 14 other murders that contained a Russian trail in them. They recalled Boris Berezovsky, a rich and influential opponent of Putin's regime. He was found hanged in his own estate in 2013. Subsequently, people from Berezovsky's circle who participated in the so-called Project Moscow, the purchase of real estate in London for Russian oligarchs, also began to die. Scott Young somehow fell from a sophisticated apartment on the 4th floor. Johnny Alichov also jumped or fell from the roof of a shopping mall. Robert Curtis and Paul Castle jumped under a train in the subway, which, being millionaires, they never used. There were other deaths. But the poisoning of the former Russian spy Serhiy Skripal and his daughter Yulia was not entirely successful. They were found unconscious on a bench near the Maltings shopping centre, which they had previously visited. By all indications, the father and daughter were poisoned with some kind of chemical compound, as the police officers who were the first to check on them also ended up in hospital. The investigation, conducted separately by British law enforcement agencies and the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, found that the Skripals were poisoned with the Novichok agent, which is produced by the laboratory in the city of Chechen, located in the Saratov region of Russia.
Нервово-паралітична сполука, новачок.
According to a report by a British expert, the Novichok nerve agent was used in the assassination attempt on the Skripal family. According to experts, the compound was applied to the door handle of the house in a concentrated form, which led to the resulting poisoning.
Призвело до відповідного отруєння.
Russian special services are very careful, so it's very difficult to prove their participation in a terrorist attack or murder. However, it's not impossible. On April the 10th, 2010, near the Russian city of Smolensk, a plane carrying the Polish president Lech Kaczynski, as well as many top public and military figures of Poland, crashed. Everyone on board died. Russia investigated the tragedy itself. According to the reports of their investigation commission, the tragedy occurred due to mistakes by the crew, who lost control of the plane in very difficult weather conditions. Instead, the Polish Commission for Investigations, which set to work much later than Russian investigators, only declared in 2018 that it had evidence of a powerful explosion which took place on board the aircraft and led to the crash. The plane started falling apart 900 meters before the collision with objects on the ground. Polish experts have found signs of explosives on the wreckage of the airliner. If the Poles manage to submit their report to the Russian authorities as an international request, it's likely that the Kremlin will do the usual thing and blame the terrorist attack on low-level performers. Through this practice, the international agency Inform drew attention to the fact that over the past 25 years, out of 42 Russian generals, only 3 have probably died of natural causes. The last such powerful mass death of star military commanders took place in 2016. Just like there was a period in the Russian Federation when Russian generals began to die en masse in 2016, as did people who were involved in the annexation of Crimea and the war against Ukraine. However, it's fairly difficult to prove the involvement of Russian special services in that.
Спеціальні служби могли бути причетними до цього досить важко.
Although tracking the battlefield and the involvement of dead generals in illegal armed conflicts is not hard at all, we will just give examples of those who died after the annexation of Crimea and the beginning of hostilities in eastern Ukraine. On September the 24th, 2017, Lieutenant General Vasiliy Mitrokhin was killed on the front line in Syria. He arrived in Syria as the coordinator of the entire Russia contingent and had no reason at all to be at the command post where an enemy mine caught him. The investigation concluded that the information about the location of the general was intentionally leaked to the enemy. General Toropov headed the terrorist group in Donbass, the so-called First Army Corps of the fake DPR from August 2015. He received the rank of Lieutenant General precisely for the battles that took place on the territory of Ukraine. Another deceased military commander is Igor Sogun, the head of the main intelligence department of the Russian General Staff. It was he who was involved in the planning and security for the fake referendum held by Russian invaders in Crimea. According to official data, Sogun died of a heart attack on January 3, 2016. However, the American intelligence company Stratfor announced that the general died in Lebanon in unclear circumstances. There is also General Oleksandr Shushkin. He directed the occupation of Crimea and died on December 27, 2015 from a heart attack.
на території України.
There have also been political assassinations involving Russian special services on the territory of Ukraine during the armed conflict with the Russian Federation. Therefore, the territory of independent Ukraine is an object of activity for the Russian Federation's special services.
Російської Федерації.
Over the past 3 years, at least 4 terrorist attacks have taken place on the territory of Ukraine. Ukrainian intelligence officers were killed in the main. In particular, Colonel Maxim Shapoval, whose officers operated both in the anti-terrorist operation and in the territory of occupied Donbass. Explosives were placed in his vehicle. The same method of murder was applied to Oleksandr Poteev, who worked at the counterintelligence service of the Security Service of Ukraine. Although reporters opposed to the Kremlin, such as Pavel Sheremet, and opposition Russian politician Denis Voronenkov, were also killed in Kiev. The latter, in the traditions of the 1990s, was shot dead on a crowded street in the center of Kiev. In the early 90s of the last century, when the Soviet Union collapsed, all state structures of the USSR went into oblivion with it. However, there was one Soviet structure that not only survived, but also got stronger: the KGB. When the USSR ceased to exist, the KGB didn't have anything to guard, but there were hundreds of well-trained soldiers, killers, spies and diplomats, including those abroad. There were established channels of drug trafficking within the structure of the KGB. All of this was sufficient for the KGB to become the author of the criminal revolution of the 90s in the post-Soviet space. KGB officers taught bandits and killers how to kill and sell drugs. After all, they had such influence on politics that they appointed a KGB officer to the post of President of Russia. But this is a topic of our next program. But for now, remember, every phenomenon has its pros and cons, its pro et contra.